Welcome to X CEO. Today, I'm your host Scarlett, and I'm in the studio with Yael Ossowski. He's the Deputy Director of the Consumer Choice Center, where we're going to discuss the fact that Elon Musk is taking the European Commission to court. Yael, thank you for being with us. What is going on?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Scarlett. And I guess if we're going to give the news breakdown, we have the European Union's Digital Services Act, and this has been put forward by the Commission. It is now law. It has been put into force. And essentially, X, that is formerly known as Twitter, has been found in contravention of some of the elements of the Digital Services Act. Sounds like a mouthful, but if you actually look at sort of the charging document and the preliminary findings of this investigation, and we should remember that much of this investigation was started last year in December. This is after Elon Musk had purchased X, then Twitter, and it was announced, it was earlier last week, that this new preliminary finding was put out by Thierry Breton, who's our beautiful commissioner that we have here in Europe to discuss all things digital. And it has found that X has been in contravention. And that means that there will be a next step of figuring out what to do about these contraventions and what the penalties will be for X. And in response to this, Elon Musk, who owns X, went onto the platform and stated that they will be countersuing, figuring out if they can actually go against the European Commission and get this thrown out. The Digital Services Act, if we remember, is this element, this large bill that aims to regulate platforms, online platforms. It gives various liabilities, various actions they're supposed to take. And these are placed upon platforms that are deemed as very large online platforms. So there's an entire acronym for it. And these websites or platforms, once they reach a certain limit of users per month, they're required by EU law to have moderation teams and to implement all these different strategies that the European Commission wants. And if they don't, they risk being penalized per day as a result of their revenue. So it's a big amount, a lot of big questions, and it's definitely going to cause some consternation.
It's interesting because I think what the main issue is actually what we're seeing is that the European Commission is trying to control what can and what cannot be said online. And I think it's very brave that Elon Musk is actually suing the European Commission for this because in a democracy there should be freedom of speech, freedom of sharing your opinions, and they shouldn't be able to control it. And what I think is more interesting is that he even admitted on X, Twitter, that they tried to make an illegal secret deal with him. So if he would allow the surveillance to happen, to say it like that, they would not find him. Can you tell more about it, and what is your take on that?
So I think we have to give the whole story of the background of the purchase of Twitter, now X, and then sort of when these EU actions came together, and perhaps when this secret deal might have been arranged or pitched to Elon Musk and his team. So you had in April of 2023, you had Elon Musk was talking about essentially we're going to look at Twitter. He put out his huge bid. It took a lot of time. There was a lot of back and forth. And already by then, I think it was within 2 weeks of Elon making his sort of initial announcement, you already had Thierry Breton, who was using social media and saying, be sure that you follow the European Commission's regulations that we're in charge with enforcing. And so they were already very, very much on Elon Musk's case because they knew that what he wanted to outline for the Twitter platform is that it would be a free speech platform. And what many of the European commissioners were saying is that this needs to be in line with what EU law mandates. And what it mandates is that you have moderation of content. Now, there's all kinds of different words that are being used, the different types of legalese that are inserted into the DSA to try to enforce this. But essentially, X would be required to man, forgive the use of the term, they'd have to man a large moderation team to look for content that can be labeled as perhaps misinformation, disinformation, extremist content, any kind of sexually abusive material. They would need to have a dedicated in-house team in order to flag all of that in order to be compliant with the DSA. And what Elon Musk is alleging is that the EU came to him and said, hey, look, if you just put together this team, if you just moderate some of the posts of your users, if you allow us to suspend a couple of accounts, if you allow us to give you advice on who to moderate or perhaps who we should put the limit on, then we won't put this any further in court. We won't try to find you in contravention of the DSA, and all this can go away. And as you can guess, Elon Musk, sort of not wanting to capitulate, said no. And that's why we got the action last week, the preliminary findings. And I wanted to go through these very quickly because I think they're important. The one contravention that's first mentioned has to do with verification. So, those of you who are big users of X, such as I'm willing to pay for the ability to get a blue check mark. And that is something that the European Commission says is not in line with what the DSA allows for. You cannot have a verification process where people just pay and submit their identity document and then that's it, which is a bit of a strange point because, again, this is just something that X has implemented and there's not really a procedure in the law for figuring out who can be verified online or not. Sort of the second one that comes up is data availability. So they want to have a searchable database for advertising specifically. So the European Commission wants to have a publicly accessible database to see who puts out advertising on X, who is paying for it, all the names attached, all of that. And then lastly is the Twitter API. This is the ability for researchers to use the Twitter or X timeline to search posts, to follow trends. X has now started charging researchers for this rather than giving it out for free, which again, normally you would assume is just the cost of doing business. But that is something that Breton and some of the other commissioners say is against the Digital Services Act. Obviously, this goes far beyond what we really consider regulation of these platforms to be, even under DSA or even DMA, the Digital Markets Act. And I think the argument that I've made here is you just cannot have a free speech platform like X, as Elon Musk would like to have it. You cannot have it comply with European law. It's just incompatible, incongruent. It doesn't work. And Europe is going to have to figure out another way to make this happen, or many European users are not going to be able to access these sites.
Yeah, because what you're saying actually now is that the DSA is limiting the freedom of speech. In that sense, it's also an infringement on democracy. And therefore, this court case is going to be super important because it's going to set the precedent for other platforms as well. Do you think Elon Musk has a good case? Do you think he has a good chance of winning this legal battle?
It's hard to say. I mean, the Digital Services Act, there were a lot of problems with it. I wrote about it at the time. There was a lot of criticism, but it went through the normal bureaucratic procedures of the European Union. It was introduced by the Commission, it was debated on and had amendments by the Parliament, and it was accepted by the Council. So, pure, logistically, sure, it passes muster. Does it go in contravention of some of the European treaties? Does it go against the European Charter of Human Rights? That's another question. That is something that I have to be battled in courts. I do not pretend to be an expert on continental courts and freedom of speech. We don't tend to have the same free speech protections in Europe as people might have in the United States or Canada. So that I'm not sure on, but I do think that Elon makes a very interesting case. And this case is really the nexus of, does the European Union have the ability to regulate and legislate on these online platforms? And are they able to actually build a regime where this stuff is required? Or can companies like X, free speech platforms, are they even allowed to exist? It's an interesting nexus. I don't know what the answer to the question would be. I know what my inclination would be. But again, I'm not sitting in the commission. I have not been recently elected as a parliamentarian in Brussels. There's going to be a lot of very sticky questions on this. And it really girds a lot of the debate around Brussels, the European Union, and the influence on business, social media, and the internet. And does Brussels right now have an appropriate role? Should that be minimized or maximized? Hopefully, the courts can find a better answer to this question.
Well, we're going to make sure to follow that closely. Yeah, Al, thank you so much for being with us here today, for explaining everything. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And also for our viewers watching at home. Yeah, Al, you wrote an amazing article on the whole issue. We're going to link it in the bio so people can read it. And thank you for watching.